Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Jackson, it's one of the predictable pleasures in both of our lives.
It really is, isn't it? I realized that I had not confirmed with you have someone new doing your
Carolyn. Yeah, Carolyn.
Yeah, Carolyn. Yeah. And but I knew that you knew that I knew that you knew I would be there.
Yes, because we're 12 months in the schedule.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's so relaxing that way.
Yeah. I just have it in my calendar, so I just at the beginning of the week, I just look in the calendar and 12:30 Orlando time.
And Toronto time, conveniently.
Toronto time, conveniently. So I got back from Genius Network, which was really terrific.
Yes, this is the first one I've missed in, I think, 10 years.
Yeah.
Almost.
And your presence was missed. Yeah.
Well, that's...
Personally, I'm just saying personally.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean, there wasn't a public announcement or anything.
No moment of silence or anything.
No moment of silence. Yeah, no Remembrance Day. This is actually the 100th Remembrances Day today. Yeah, I have a connection with that. Bab's grandfather, a colonel, West Point graduate, was the highest-ranking American officer killed during the First World War.
Wow.
Yeah, July 22nd, 1918, he was killed. And we had known that, and that's the sort of historical information that I kind of feast on. I like having anchors in history, and that one. And we went to West Point. He graduated in 1893 from the military academy at West Point. And there was a big plaque noting the fact that he had been the highest-ranking American officer. And he was a colonel, so that kind of tells you the Americans kept their generals safe.
Yes, exactly. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
and then we had a reunion. So in 1993, we were invited to the reunion of the 100th graduating class of West Point, and there weren't a lot. There were only about 60 graduates that year, and everybody showed up. Every family who had a ancestor graduate in 1893 had a member there, which I found it was kind of striking, but it tells you that the military probably keeps track of its their relationship networks better than probably any other human activity on the planet. And there was a lot of military in the later generations. And Bab's family on that side goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Her family had somebody fight in every war since the 1770s, 1780s,
right.
up to Desert Storm in the early 1990s. Yeah, so a truculent group of people, the Smiths.
Wow,
very truculent Smiths. Yeah, and in the Civil War, they fought on both sides, which probably was not unusual.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And not, worth noting, one of the two of us on the call is a veteran.
Yes, I'm a veteran, but you're the son of a veteran.
That's exactly right. Right. So,
and it's getting rarer and rarer. There's only two of us in my company who have military experience. One of my tech people actually fought in the Serbian army just before the. Trying to think. He fought in the Serbian army after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That would have been part of the Soviet bloc. before the collapse, but he was in a tank. He was actually a radio guy in a tank. And those are the only two out of. So that's getting to be a rare, kind of rare experience, military, and
it really is.
Yeah, and
because all my uncles,
I will tell you this:
so many
we have
of my
a lot
uncles and stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you had a lot, I bet.
Yeah, that all, military in that generation, like, I've got, let's see, 3 or 4 uncles that were in Vietnam, and my grandfather, who was, deceased now, but was in World War II as well. And an important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bab's father, so I was talking about the grandfather, the one who was killed, but her father was also in the First World War. So her father was born in 1898. So Bab's, kind of rare that you have a parent who was born in 1898, and he was also in the First World War. And from her description of what he did for the 10 or 15 years afterwards, it's very clearly a case of PTSD.
Oh. And that really wasn't even thought of as a thing then. Yeah.
No, they called him shell shocked. That was the term that was used after the Second World War. That they just.
It's amazing when you think about how long ago 1898 is. Yeah. Yet, you're talking about somebody's grandfather, right? And I heard.
No, this is the father. This is the father, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So her father's 1898, and her grandfather was born in, I think, in probably 1870,
right. And so that was really interesting that I was listening to Joe Rogan, one of his podcasts, and he was talking about how this, we think about the 1700s, like when we were writing the Constitution and doing all that stuff, and all of the slavery and all of the stuff that was going on is really only 3 people ago. Really, that's the way he put it in context, right? When you think about it, sounds like forever ago, but it's really 3 people ago. That was what was going on. I mean, that's a really interesting context for it,
Yeah. I mean, I think I've reported this on some other podcasts, but I knew a woman who was born in 1873 that I talked to, and she knew somebody who had been born in 1795. 1795, or was alive in the 17. He was from 1795. Yeah, she knew him. So I'm talking to a person and we span now 4 centuries. So I'm in the 21st. I talked to somebody in the 20th who was born in the 19th, who knew somebody who was born in the 18th. So it's 3 people. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's kind of interesting to think about it. And I was just thinking, it was a little comment I was reading on the internet yesterday. They said, like people talk about the past like it's gone, but actually 90% of what we live in is actually the past going forward.
Right. That was the context of Joe Rogan's thing, that he was talking about if we could somehow revive, Thomas Jefferson right now, he'd be shocked that he goes, showing him that we're still using the Constitution, and he was going, "You guys are still using that? He didn't come up with anything new." Oh, it was pretty funny, actually, the context of the way he was joking about it. But that's, it's such enduring. I know that you always point to the Constitution, and you point to the founding fathers. That's something that is enduring. When we were talking about the influence, things that matter for hundreds of years.
Yeah, and actually, if you do sort of Google, how Google will identify mentions of things, and they can do it backwards, So Google will go back all the way till, I think, the Constitution was 1787 when it was ratified, and so it's 230 years that the Constitution has been the basis for thinking about government in the United States. And the interesting thing about that, it has been far more mentioned as time has gone by. Like, they didn't really talk about it all that much in the first 40 or 50 years. And it's not until you get up near the Civil War that it really starts being talked about, because all of a sudden there was a constitutional crisis with the Civil War.
It comes up when people are trying to get away with stuff. That's when it comes up.
When they're trying, And what a lot of people, they say that the Constitution is what governs us. Actually, it isn't the Constitution governs us. It's the Constitution governs government.
Yes.
It's actually the rules by which government has to operate. So it's the only, probably the only instrument on the planet that actually does that. And I say that because most people here in Canada, we have a constitution, but it actually kind of governs the people. And it seems like a doubling down. You have the government, and then you have a constitution which governs. But in the United States, it's pretty clear that the Constitution is actually pushing people's lives. So there's all sorts of limits that actually keep the government from getting too involved in your life and my life. Yeah, and I'm appreciative. I just want to take a moment and say that I appreciate that there's something that keeps government from being too involved in my life.
Me too.
How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that today?
I feel great about that today. I feel that that's really the thing that, we just had the elections here, and we're going now through, right here in Florida, there's all the kerfuffle, and they're doing a recount or demanding a recount. And
it's like an encore. It's like,
Gillum retracted his concession.
Yeah, well, Gore did too. You remember?
Exactly.
Gore. Yeah, he was sure, but then he wasn't so sure.
Right.
And, the great hero in that respect is Nixon, because Nixon had enormous grounds for having a recount in the United States against the Kennedys in 1960, specifically with one too many cemeteries voting in Chicago, which was crucial.
My goodness.
Yes. Oh yeah. You live after death in Chicago as a voter. So anyway, and he was. They talked to him about it, and he says, "No," he said, "it would be too upsetting to the country to do that." He says, "We'll go with the score." And a lot of people have negative attitudes towards Nixon, but I thought that probably was a good move on his part. And I think that Gore would be remembered better if he hadn't put everybody through that for 6 or 7 weeks. And the folks in Florida who are pushing this probably will be not remembered well for it. So
I think you're right.
Yeah. And okay, so that wraps up U.S. politics for the
U.S. politics confession, and we'll be right back after this brief break. So tell me, I want to ask you about the your takeaways from the annual event.
Well, the big one was actually for me. It sort of combined that Robert Cialdini of Persuasion fame was there, and he gave great talk. He always does. He's very insightful. And then Joe had me up on the Saturday, so it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and he had me up first thing on Saturday, and it was just an interview, and his question was how I prepare myself for a conference like Genius Network. In other words, how I get ready, because I do quite a bit of thinking before I go into something like that,
right?
So that I'm not reactive when I get there. In other words, I'm not. I know people who take 10 pages of notes.
Right.
When they're there, and it's not my style to do that, because I more or less want new information about things that I'm already focused on. So I do a strategic coach impact filter, and I lay out 7 or 8 things that I'm really interested in. And for example, I'm really interested in holograms. I knew there was going to be a major presentation on holograms, so I wanted to move forward on that. And but Joe asked me what my attitude was paying the amount of money that I pay to Genius Network, because we're in the 100,000.
Yes.
Babs and I are in the 100,000 group, and he said that. How I look at that, and he said, "Well, that's a lot of money." And I said, "Well, it's a lot of money if it's a cost, but it may not be a lot of money if it's an investment." And that was the discussion that I had. And then I talked about the difference between having a consumer mindset when you attend Genius Network, or whether you have a transformer mindset. So this is just a little fork in the road that I did a podcast with Shannon Waller here, Strategic Coach, and I said, what I notice is that the unhappiest people in life, not just in relationship to a conference like Strategic Coach, but just unhappy period, are people who essentially have a customer viewpoint towards life. In other words, that things are supposed to be done for them, okay? And then they sit in judgment of whether enough has been done for them to come up to their standards, okay? Yes. And so they're a critic, actually. They're taking a very critical attitude toward 3 days, and they paid $10,000 if they are not a member.
Yeah.
And so there's $10,000 for 3 days of sitting and listening and talking. And they have complaints because out of their critical attitude, they're saying, well, I thought they would do this for me. I thought they would do this for me. I thought the experience would do this, but there's a gap. And I have a complaint about the gap, and I think it's so-and-so's fault for doing this. So what I notice about customers is that starts with criticism. They believe that they are the judge, and they've got standards that the experience has to live up to. And no matter how, good the experience might be, there's a gap between what actually happened and what they were expecting, and they have a complaint about that gap. And therefore, they have to find someone to blame for it. And I said, if your mind works that way, there is no experience you're ever going to have in your life that's actually going to make you happy. You're always going to be kind of, disappointed at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one fork in the road. The other fork in the road takes you to the other. Well, the fork, that's one side of the fork. The other side of the fork is being a transformer, where you fundamentally commit yourself to actually making a contribution. In other words, while you're there, you're going to make a contribution, and it would be to other people or to the audience, the audience in particular, and that you're going to collaborate with the people who are actually there to make this contribution. And out of that, you're going to create something. You're going to create something new. So if you contrast criticism versus contribution, complaining versus collaboration, and blaming versus creating, you see that that's a very significant difference between those two approaches.
Wow. And the whole, it's funny because you say that and people end up thinking, well, did I get a return on my time?
Yeah.
Like it's up to the event, the person who's holding the event to drive that, that it's their responsibility. That did I get that? Yeah. And you're saying, this is something that, Joe and I've had a lot of conversations about this idea of the return on genius, and not that it's something that, that Joe's responsible for providing. He's creating the environment for it, certainly. But when we look at what is actually going to be a return, it's going to be an idea, or it's going to be a capability, a collaboration. Or in some cases, it could be a client. I mean, whatever it is, but you have to be aware when you're going into a situation like that. That's what you're saying, preparing and knowing, like, what are you looking for in there? You're the outcome that you're going to get, how you measure, I would imagine, would be primarily the ideas that you're getting, simply because you know that the seed of an idea can have in your hands an amazing outcome. Like, I remember you talk about in your very first Genius Network meeting, the idea of going 10 times. Yeah. Even when Joe said that's his expectation for you, that you get a 10 times return. And if you can't, then maybe it's not for you, which is great. And kind of, saying that, and it's cute and it sounds confidence endearing, but when we really broke it down, it's like equipping people is an important part to help them recognize where that return's going to come from. But your idea of that 10 times immediately then led to the thought of that as a foundational thing, that 10 times ambition. The 10 times ambition program.
Yeah. And it came in that first, the first hour of conversation. And then I gave a report to Joe after 5 years. Babs and I had been in the 25K for 5 years. And so we had like a $250,000 investment over a 5-year period. Yeah. And I said, just with the creation of the 10 times ambition program, at that point, after 5 years, we had gotten a $16 million return on the $250,000. So it was 64 times return. I said, I don't care what you're investing in, 64 times in 5 years, good return.
Yes.
And so when I started the 100K, I started 2 years ago, estimated that in 5 years we'd have like $1 million investment in the 100K, and I said, "Well, I'm looking for 64 million. I'm just going to say that." And so when I go to Genius Network, I'm looking for where's the 64 million coming from,
right?
And how do I have to be thinking about what I'm doing right now for 64 million to be the outcome here. But I couldn't do this sitting at home by myself. The fact that Joe has created his Genius Network, and then there's others like Peter Diamandis with Abundance 360. Yes. That's another environment that I go to. Our podcast series that you and I have, I'm looking there. So the big thing is I'm not a customer of life. I'm a transformer of life.
Right. Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And I think it makes a big difference. And I think the educational system just generally experienced, in other words, you just more or less do what they say, starting at the earliest grades and going through to perhaps graduate degree.
Yeah.
I think probably teaches people how to be customers and not transformers. Certainly the general consumer culture teaches you to be a customer. It doesn't teach you to be a transformer. I don't think it teaches you to be a transformer.
Yes.
I think that comes from someplace else.
Yeah, it gives you the raw materials to transform. I mean, very interesting.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, when you take it back to our original procrastination model, that if you're a customer attitude towards life and you have a bigger and better goal, and you're approaching it as a customer, first of all, you'll criticize your bigger and better goal and probably take all the energy out of it. I think people who have a critical mind are not great at goal setting because they approach things from a critical standpoint, and one of the things they'll criticize is themselves for having bigger and better goals in a world where there's so much inequality. And what gives them the right to have bigger and better goals in a world where there's so much inequality? And and so I think that a lot of people don't have bigger and better goals in today's society because it makes them feel guilty about what they already have, and should they really be thinking about having more?
Yeah, that is really, there's so much of the mental stuff going on with that, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
And when you're really like, I've just had this last little while here where, we've been going through this exercise of creating 1,000 Hoot Up hours, and then realizing that I've already got those 1,000 hours.
Yeah.
And thinking about those now as an opportunity to invest those hours really just in my unique ability. And, I just look at and it's almost, I think that the clue for people that they're in their unique ability is when, probably from themselves and a little bit from others, you get the sense that it can't be just this, that's like, that just doesn't seem like even, work or whatever somebody would define it as, that makes such a difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting thing because I'm noticing that if you buy into this critical way of looking at things, first of all, there's an implicit that things are supposed to be done for you. I think, if you're a customer, that means that someone else has to have created things that they're trying to sell to you or to provide to you. And that means that you're not really bringing anything of your own capability to the situation, except being a critic, potential, and down the road, a complainer and a blamer. And the Perry Marshall, who Perry made a great statement. He was on another podcast series that I have with Mark Young called The American Checklist. And he said, in American history, if you look, we were talking, because the whole discussion is about America, and it's about 400 years now. I mean, a lot of people think of America being as old as since the Revolutionary War and the Constitution, but actually, there was 150 years of history before that. So it's about 400. We're closing in right now on about 400 years that people from Europe have been developing themselves and communities in North America. And he said, right from the beginning, there was this tension between, on the one hand, individualism, that individuals were encouraged to go out and hack out a life for themselves. But at the same time, there was thing that equality, that nobody should get too much ahead of the game. In other words, that there's this kind of, we encourage people to go out and map out new territories and, increase our success. But on the other hand, you've got this follow-up thing called equality. Yeah, but we don't want you to get too much of a good thing. And I think taxes have something to do with that.
Right.
Tax just to take some of your gain.
Hey, come on back here now. Now, don't get too far.
Yeah, and it's just a tension. And he said it'll never, neither side will never get the better of the other for too long before there's a breakout. And he said the tension creates enormous dynamism and creativity. And he's got a great line, Perry. He's so articulate. And Perry said on our program, he said, "This is how I think. All Americans are born with an equal opportunity to make their lives as unequal as possible."
That's brilliant.
Don't you? I just found it extraordinarily brilliant, actually.
That's a great thing. Make their lives as
born with an
equal opportunity.
To make your life as unequal as possible. And there's no prescribed way. There's no prescribed way for doing that. So if you're born with a lot, in other words, you're born with a lot, then you can make your life unequal in one way. But if you're not born with very much, you can still make your life unequal by using what you have.
Yeah.
But it just seemed to me like just an amazing encapsulation of an entire culture in one sentence. I just, but it got my mind going. It's not consuming.
Dan, I was losing you there for a second.
There we
go. Perfect.
It seemed to me that Perry's statement puts the emphasis that the fundamental capabilities that America encourages is to transform what you have into something new, better, and different.
Yeah. I mean, it's so we really, when you think about just all the ways, all the opportunities, and all the things that we have available, and that we're seeing now as Cloudlandia, which is not a national thing. Cloudlandia is the world. It's that's gonna have the biggest impacts when everybody has equal access to Cloudlandia. Now we're really talking. That's why the people who are trying to make the biggest difference right now are talking about things like satellite internet for an entire African continent, or the all those places where the internet or access to Cloudlandia isn't there. That, you imagine, that's like such an amazing difference, because you think about it's funny how, funny's not the right word, but it's worth observing how our perception of the underdeveloped nations, that the human brain, I don't believe, is any different in those areas, where you'll still have people that are higher IQ and higher capacity to really catch on and thrive with that opportunity of having Cloudlandia available.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of, I don't know why my mind went to Tierra del Fuego, which is
Okay,
the
I don't know.
very tip of South America. It's the furthest most, below Tierra del Fuego is Antarctica. So,
Okay. Oh, wow.
and so it's the very, very tip. And I was thinking of having completely, 5G 5G free internet at Tierra del Fuego. That would be sort of a test of how far the system has gone.
Mm-hmm.
When that's true, you're in Tierra del Fuego and you say, well, of course I've got complete internet access here. Why wouldn't I have? And the only probably remote place would be the scientific station on Antarctica. You would get complete internet work there. But the internet seems to me like electrification,
Right.
like, it seems to be, electrification was an enormous capability, when you think about basically the last 150 years or so, we've had probably the complete electrification of the planet, even if you have to use batteries or you have to use solar dishes or something. Yeah, we're getting electrification of the planet. And what an amazing transformation that is. And, it's probably measured in size of economy, measured in size of population, measured in, complexity of human interaction is probably measured by those things that were not possible if you didn't have electrification.
I just watched a TED Talk from 2003 with Jeff Bezos, and he was sharing how, innovations, like going back to talking about electrification, that the original use for electricity was not even as electricity. It was to light homes. And so when everything was being what you would call electrified, it was only for, they had these light sockets that would go, that was the use for the electricity, was to light the homes. And so all these appliances, the first appliances that were sort of done, they were adapted. There were no plugs in the walls. It was things that you would take out the light bulb and you would screw in an adapter, screw in a piece that was like a light bulb that would bind the electricity through to whatever thing you were doing. And there was no off switch on things, right? It was either electrified or not. So you would turn it on and off with the light switch.
By screwing.
Yes.
Isn't
that interesting?
Or the light switch. Yeah, well, it kind of tells you, too, what was most crucial, that lighting was the first. In other words, why did everybody want to have light? Well, first of all, you defeated the dark, and I think that's so primal in human beings, to defeat the dark. I mean, most of human experience was lived, in the dark. So when the sun went down, it was dark, and and I'm always amazed, when you see things like Game of Thrones or other, medieval, where they're showing medieval, and they're just showing hundreds and hundreds of torches.
Yes.
Things are really, really lit up. They have hundreds of torches, and but if you look at the cost of having torches, they probably had a torch per room. If that. I mean, the things. It was not cheap. It was not cheap, to bring light through candles or through torches or anything like that. It was not cheap. Right. And we're, it's probably been one of the greatest huge benefits that we've had without realizing it. I mean, people are born today and they have no realize. But I remember it every year, because every year they have a thing called Earth Hour. When you're invited by this worldwide organization to turn your lights off for an hour.
Oh wow!
Out of respect for the Earth.
It's never come across my radar.
Yeah, well, what I call it, I use the event, but I transform it in the sense that I turn on every single light I have, and we have 3 properties in Toronto, so I make a point of, and they do it in the evening so that you can see the difference. So we have all of our exterior lights on, and it's like 60, 70 lights. Yes. And I walk through and I turn every one of them, and then I sit down for an hour and just appreciate the fact that we have electricity. So I call it electricity hour. I said I'm very thankful to all the people who have made this possible.
Yes. Oh, that's so funny. But that's kind of where we were talking about the internet being like electricity as it's spreading across the globe here. And the interesting thing that 20 years ago, probably the intention of the internet was to give people access to information. Yeah. And what it's really turned out to be is the killer app is we've got access to each other, to the people. Yes. That's the real thing that's happened in the last 10 years as social media has really become what the state of the internet is now. And that just opens up. I mean, we're right on the cusp of this. We're able to collaborate in ways that were never possible. And,
the interesting thing is you can see with the coining of the term fake news. Yeah. That we're in the zone of confusion.
Right there's now. No middleman. Right.
Yeah, confusion because the media, first with newspapers and then influential magazines, and then radio, I would suspect, and then television. Yeah, they arrogated to themselves that they would determine what news was for you. In other words, so we will tell you what is news, and we will only allow those things that we think are news to come to your attention. And therefore, government played a big part in that because it could censor. Governments could either propagate a certain type of information or withhold another type of information.
Right.
And but what social media has done is bypass that in the sense that, I'll kind of determine what's information. I can read the New York Times, or I can believe lying Dean Jackson, his views on that things. That liar, Dean Jackson, the great, the great exaggerator,
great manipulator, right?
The manipulator my favorite manipulator, Dean Jackson. So I, on one hand, then I have the New York Times. On the other hand, I have manipulator Dean Jackson. I like Dean better. He comes with all sorts of sound effects that the New York
That's
Times
right.
doesn't come
That's
with.
Right.
And it's really, but it's not. And with each of us, we have our favorite, and then we have a whole network of other people, and it's actually their information and their take on things, which is now becoming more influential in how we think about things going forward than getting it from these institutional sources.
Mm-hmm. And I
think the institutional sources are feeling the pinch on this because
I think you're right.
Because they become more reality show bombastic as we go forward. I mean, they're trying to yank our chain with all sorts of scary news and this just in, latest, and everything else, and they're trying to get our attention back. But I think it's a losing game on their part because you can just not be on their channel.
Yeah, and it was really, I wonder if I think about that a lot. And something you said, it was some It was kind of in a joke about how somebody would advertise the best something in town, and then it was or on the street, and then the best thing in the town. Do you remember what you were saying?
Yeah. Well, there were two furniture stores. One of them put a sign out, "Best Furniture Store on the Street," and the other one said, "Best Furniture Store in the neighborhood." And then it started escalation. So it was an arms race after that. They got out to the Cosmos, Best Furniture Store in the Cosmos. And then once one of them had said Best Furniture Store on the Cosmos, the other one came back and said Best Furniture Store on the Street.
Right.
You can see that, but I'm really struck with the power of podcasts as a alternative kind of commentary. I think podcasts are really competing very successfully with the commentary that the news media tries to give you. They try to comment on things and get your attention. But the enormous success of podcasts kind of indicates to me that this is a losing battle on their side.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, we want, everything, that whole, we definitely want to watch or listen to whatever we want to. There's never been a better time right now for that. I mean, we get to custom choose, but we still only have the same 16 hours or 100 Jacksons every day in which to consume all of this. And our choices are so much greater.
Well, the other thing is that we're forging our own way, each of us in life, and I think that entrepreneurs are really the most conscious of anybody actually doing this, because you have the four freedoms of freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationship, and freedom of purpose, which can be continually expanded and integrated with each other, so that I'm looking for certain kinds of information. I'm looking for certain kinds of experience to augment the forward motion of the entrepreneurial vehicle that I call strategic coach. And I'm looking for information that speeds up strategic coach. And therefore, there's no source of information out there that can be completely satisfactory to me. They'll provide maybe some insight, momentary insight, but there's nothing out there that really I would look to as my definitive source of information. In other words, that what they say is the Bible.
Yes.
You can see how information is being organized. So every morning I go to an aggregator called Real Clear Politics. And Real Clear Politics will have upwards of 25 articles that have been pulled from everywhere during the past 24 hours. And the New York Times, which has always considered itself the definitive newspaper in the world, has to compete to be one of the 25 every day. And there are many days when the New York Times doesn't make it onto the list. So this massive authoritative organization is now competing to be part of the show. And that kind of shows you the drop in status and the drop in influence that the major institutions have. Yeah.
And you think that kind of then paves the way? I read Dave Pell, from Next Draft, and his whole thing is that he does exactly what you're talking about, as far as like he goes to 100 different places, scours all of the news that comes out, and in his words, he plucks the 10 most interesting things for the day and delivers them with a his summary, a little pithy kind of, insert into it with a link, and then he may link to an opposing or a deeper view about that one item. But the way he describes it on his website is that he says, "I am the algorithm."
Yeah.
So it's not a
well, we are. If you want to, I think that's a keen insight, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but nobody knows what the source code is of our individual algorithm.
Right. So you get this. He's being a who.
We're lucky.
He's being a who in a way, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We're lucky if we understand what our source code is.
Right.
We certainly don't understand. We've known each other for, increasingly we have more and more conversations over the last 10 years. But there, if I'm guessing correctly on about what 1% of what interests you, I'm probably doing a good job.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You have vast areas of interest, and
yes,
when we're away from each other, you're exploring all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
And we each bring back things that we think the other person's going to find valuable.
Have you seen Future Loop that Eben Pagan is doing something with Peter Diamandis on this? Yes.
Yeah. No, I haven't. I really haven't.
Which is really
is it good?
He's got a website called futurescope.com, which is kind of the baseline of this, but they're working on a bigger project called Future Loop. But Future Scope is a aggregator of all things. There's about 5 or 6 a day items that are near future, or all the things that are in abundance, really, with AR, with virtual reality, with robotics, with genomics, all of the things that are going to shape the near future, as Eben calls it. And Peter too, the foreseeable, the near future, the 5 to 7 year kind of window. And so that's really a good thing. I think about that as, the opportunity for us to really have things like that, lenses. I think as we all get to the point right now where you could spend all of your time and not, as you say, swim in all the ocean. That's what we're really in. So to really make it's almost like a leverage thing. If you've got somebody like your Real Clear Politics it's a multiplier for you. Right? You're getting from Concentrate because you're trusting them to do what you would do if you had the time to do it. Right? Is to go and you'd have to weed through all of that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and you can, you can get snared. I noticed that my discipline for not getting too excited about some new thing has gotten better as I've gone along.
Yes.
And one of the things you and I both have a propensity. We can get hooked by things, and
yes.
I had an insight that I wanted to pass on to you, because the book that I brought out in September, my game plan for living to 156.
Yes.
I mentioned the 3 things that either make you excited about the future or feeling that your life is coming to an end, and that has to do with friends, money, and purpose. In other words, that if you have lots of friends and your friends are increasing, you think your future is bigger than your past.
Yep.
If your money keeps increasing, same thing. And if your purpose keeps increasing, then you always have a future that's bigger than your past. And out of the conversations that have come up over the last 2 months regarding my game plan for living to 156, my plan for living to 156, a fourth thing has popped up, and I suddenly realized that people who have ADD have a huge advantage here, and that is that there's always increasing novelty.
Yes.
And it's not any great skill of ours. It's just the way that our brains work, is that we're constantly drawn to new things that we didn't know about before. And that has not lessened with age. In other words, that I'm my ability to be caught by some new thing is probably equal at age 74 than it was at age 24.
That's good to know, because I'm discovering that same thing about 20. I look at it, the 22 is what I was thinking of, that insatiable curiosity is not that's not gone away or lessened in any way. It's not at all at 52.
And
so
thing,
to hear you say at 74, it doesn't diminish is great.
No, I think that it doesn't have anything to do with the capability. I think it's factory equipment, in other words. And so there's nothing I have to do to actually protect this or make sure it doesn't go away. It's just that
you have to keep the
circuitry.
There. You have to keep the circuitry working, the brain. And I think that having that and exercising it and allowing it to run is exactly what keeps the circuitry running, where you're not run on a dead end cul-de-sac loop, where you're not, like you said, when your retirement of cutting self off from all the things that, this entire set of circuitry in your brain that you can imagine is like just unplugged, and you can imagine the powering down of, we don't need this whole wing of our brain now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you clowns from the circus, we're not going to have clowns anymore,
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, we're just gonna have possums,
Yeah, right, exactly.
Oh,
man.
Anyway, but it hadn't struck me how much novelty is part of feeling young, because you feel young because, oh my gosh, I didn't know anything about that. Oh wow, this is a whole new thing. And that's a young feeling, that when you are suddenly struck by something new.
That's the essence of my, I know I'm being successful when number 3 is that I'm working on projects I'm excited about and doing my very best work. And that's the, I think that would apply to you at 74 right now. You're working on things you're excited about, and you're doing your very best work. It just keeps getting better and better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dean, we're at the closing time.
Next time.
Some takeaway. Let's talk each about a takeaway from the conversation.
Okay.
People, I have to say, people who listen to this like it when we go back and we
summarize,
sort of sum up something that got developed during the hour. So,
yes.
What would you say?
Well, I really enjoyed the conversation about your way of preparing for an event where you're looking specifically for how you're going to drive your return on that event, and not just going and passively sitting and waiting to receive the return. And I think that the fact that you have had tremendous return from Genius Network specifically, is testament to you approach it differently than a lot of people that think, I'm going to try this, and they come in and they said, well, I didn't really get my return or whatever. And so that was a good takeaway for me.
Yeah. For me, it's the algorithm idea that you brought up. That each of us, from a standpoint of looking at the world and sort of filtering information, is that we each have an algorithm that has been a lifetime in development. Actually, if you're 52, you have a 52-year algorithm, and I have a 70-year-old algorithm.
Yeah.
And there's it's looking for a certain kind of information that keeps the the morale, the momentum, and the motivation of the algorithm going forward.
Yes.
And that's what I'm looking for. So, in a certain sense, you're using the future to actually feed the best of your past.
Yes. Wow. That's really good. And that keeps it rolling. It keeps it all going.
Yep. Anyway, talk
awesome.
next week.
Okay, Dan. Thanks. Have a great week.
Okay, bye.